Good morning, Chris. How you doing this morning?
Hi, Ron. Doing great. How about yourself?
Very well. It's Webinar Tuesday. Love it.
Indeed. Yeah, looking forward to this one. For everyone who's watching, this one's going to be really interesting because we're going to be going into multi-warehouse implementation for the buying group. And this is really something that can apply to a lot of different scenarios. So if you think about buying groups and how they have drop shipping, typically you're going to be kind of fulfilling from different distribution centers potentially. And of course, you may have a direct fulfillment model where you are directly fulfilling and may have multiple locations. All of this has to be coordinated, right, Ron? And so we're going to kind of talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
that in detail today.
Yeah, sounds good. So let's kind of kick off by defining what multi warehouse is and why it's so important to buying groups. And I know we lightly touched about at least the definition. We lightly talked about it in a previous webinar chapter about inventory management specifically, where we really talked about the buying groups come to you because typically they're buying in large quantities, whether that's a large quantity of buyers like at a Costco, right? Or whether they're buying in bulk, again, like at Costco. And so one of the things that was so important in the inventory management that we talked about is never running out of inventory and the notifications for inventory and things like that. And that is especially true now when we're talking about multi-warehouse location, because now the coordination of inventory isn't just potentially one inventory count. It could be dozens of locations, and there could be shipping implications as far as locale and intermodal shipping and cost of shipping and low inventory counts and things like that. So this one's really exciting. So let's go ahead and dive in a little bit to some of the common scenarios. Chris, why don't you just kind of tell us some of the different places that multi-warehouse applies, and then we can dive in technically on how a platform should be able to handle and address this, both from a technicality perspective and from a UI UX perspective for the buyers on the site.
Absolutely, Ron. And one of the things that I would say here is I guess one of the fundamental thoughts is that these different multi-warehouse scenarios, as we're calling them, can apply to a lot of different situations. So you could consider it from a functional perspective within the application. You could consider it to be a multi-warehouse situation, even though it's the same facility. There may be reasons for that. And you'll see that a lot with different ERPs and systems that are capable of handling routing and transfers of inventory within a single location. But some of them may not have that. And it may make sense for you to kind of consider this kind of multi warehouse capability even within a single location. Um, okay, so with that caveat aside, in addition to being able to essentially take advantage of some functionality that may not literally match the kind of description of multi warehouse, we also want to consider multi warehouse literally. So you may have a situation as a buying group where there is some form of drop ship, or there may be distribution centers that are all over the world or kind of geographically optimized for lead time optimization. And so, with this type of a model and any kind of variance thereof, it's really, really important to be able to capture inventory information and be able to present to the end users what the lead times are, what is the inventory, and is there any other information that we need to capture and present to the buyers whenever they're on the site or in an omni-channel environment, they're using a device like a mobile application, tablet application, etc. Maybe it's a punch out catalog system, etc., that they are purchasing from you as the buying group. And so really the kind of the key question here is, do you have the ability to tie all of these different aspects of your fulfillment and your inventory together? And the list goes on here. Let's say that you have a multi-location scenario. A lot of different buying groups and group purchasing organizations will have multiple locations. They may sell different things that are, substantially different. They may also have a situation where they're working with another vendor, and those other vendors have kind of an area in their distribution center for the buying group, and on and on and on. So we just need to be able to manage all of this. And Ron, one of the things that's always interesting about this is a lot of buying groups tend to have some of the most complex scenarios. And, I think this is
Yeah.
because, logistically it makes sense. You've got a lot of different participants. So you're going to have split payments and split shipping as almost a guarantee. But then you also tend toward having drop shipping. So you could have fulfillment from multiple locations, from multiple different drop shippers. And this is going to add up to be kind of a, you almost have like a Cartesian explosion of different variables going on here because you also want to
Yeah.
optimize around the pricing and the inventory and making sure to fill a container. And so this is really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with all of these things at once. And this is the reality of, optimizing for these kind of group purchases is we've got to be able to understand in real time with the data and the integrations between the systems. We have to be able to understand and present that to the user as well as to the vendors in an accurate way that is reliable and credible so that the user can make a sound decision when they're purchasing, and it's based on accurate fulfillment timelines, accurate inventory and pricing data, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matter of fact, I want to give a real world example that just kind of really expounds upon the complexity that can happen in just a simple scenario of buying a product from a buying group. So, one of our clients supplied and sold railroad ties, right? And most of the time, when they sold these railroad ties and they sold them in bulk, it was to construction companies and landscape companies that were doing things like, I think the last time when I was talking to them about this, they had a client that was building and won the bid to build one of the football stadiums. And I don't remember if it was NFL or if it was just high school stadium, but they needed like 70,000 railroad ties. Well, if you've ever seen a railroad tie, you know these things aren't light, right? They're not small, they're not light. And I can't even imagine with gas prices today what it would cost to ship 70,000 railroad ties. But anyway, the scenario was our client had 11 different distribution centers across the US where they would house these railroad ties and stock them. But let's say, for example, someone in Salt Lake City is building a new stadium and they need 70,000 railroad ties. But right now, the shipment hasn't come in at Denver, so there's only 10,000 in Denver. And that's the closest facility, the closest distribution center, and there's 10,000 there. The next closest is in Seattle, and there's a couple 100,000 up there. So is it cheaper potentially, instead of getting 10,000 from Denver and then the rest from Seattle, to just order them from Seattle because they're coming on a train? And like you and I've seen in so many of our scenarios, we talk about having to fill a container or fill a truck before shipping because it's a flat rate per truck. Well, potentially it could be cheaper. But on the other hand, what if that construction crew has a date that they need to hit and they can't wait that extra 4 days to get all of them from Seattle? They need to ship the 10,000 from Denver because they can get those here in time to start so it doesn't delay the project. And the cost of delaying a multi-$100 million project is much more than the extra few thousand to ship those in. So we may not even be in control of this scenario that requires them to ship from different locations. But how easy do we make it for that crew in Salt Lake to see how many units are available in each of the 11 locations? How easy do we make it to them to estimate delivery times and shipping costs, right? You think about all that. And based on the amount of volume that people mostly buy from them, why didn't or who didn't notify Denver that they were running low on stock so they could reorder or potentially transfer some? Maybe the ship came in, offloaded them in Seattle, and then because gas was so expensive, they said, hey, let's just not ship them down to Denver. If they need some, we'll ship down, but let's not. And they let them run low and now all of a sudden caused a problem for their clients. So it can become very complex. You basically want to allow your platform to provide the capability to allow your vendors to not mess up, because the goal of your vendors and you, remember, together is to support and make it easy for your buyers of your buying group. And if you mess that up, you could potentially lose your buyers. And especially when they're buying in bulk like that, you definitely don't want to lose a client. Any additional comments on this before we move on to the next one?
I think that was perfect. Thank you.
All right. So now we got to talk about integrating the data, right? And managing the inventory data. And this could be internally, right? So if you're Costco and you have your own warehouses and you're trying to keep that inventory, there could be a significant amount of inventory management. And that's really kind of what the other inventory webinar that we covered already really covered. This one is really talking about the vendors and the supply chain and having the multiple locations, right? So this could be internally having different warehouses, very similar to the example I just gave you, where the client themselves had 11 different distribution centers across the US. But this one really gets technical when it starts talking about the different vendors. So, Chris, if you want, I want you to dive in and start talking about the technicality of implementing these vendors. How do we connect to them? How do we allow them to manage? How do we notify them if there's low stock? How do we keep this thing all copacetic between multiple vendors and them having multiple locations when it comes to not only accurate inventory counts, but drop shipping and the logistics of everything?
Yeah, it's really a big challenge, and some of this works really well with EDI, which we talked about in a previous segment of the series. And ultimately, the big thing that you want to think about is, first of all, getting to a point where you, as a buying group, a group purchasing organization, have a clear picture of exactly how things work now, and then exactly how you want them to work, at least as you see it in the near to midterm, with the optimization that you would like to get to. And the reality is, like, you're going to want to hold an idea in your mind and have a vision for the business for 3 to 5 years out, possibly longer, that everyone is working toward. And some of the vendors simply will not be able to comply with some of those capabilities or requirements or aspects of that vision. Now, what do I mean specifically? Whenever you're doing integrations, typically there is some level of, programming or some level of integration interface that has to be set up if it isn't already available. And if a vendor doesn't already have a capability for something like having REST APIs, having EDI endpoints, or having some form of interaction between your system and theirs, you may have to either help facilitate that or collaborate with their team to help them get something set up. And a lot of the vendors that you may work with, they may be at different points in their kind of life cycle and kind of different capabilities in a spectrum of capabilities that are possible for being able to integrate seamlessly. So you typically, as a buying group, you're going to want to be able to facilitate, at the end of the day, great pricing, great deals, great products and capabilities for your members. And so what this means is there may need to be some additional consideration for having to work with vendors that require manual integration. Um, Most of the time, manual integrations can be heavily optimized by setting up consistent processes, even though they may be manual. For example, we can help establish a kind of process where the vendors are updating their inventory daily, or possibly even more often than that, using a interface where they can go update and make their changes. They can real time make their changes in this interface. They can bulk upload using standard templates, or they can use our different API endpoints for the integrations. And so we kind of give them a menu of options. And then essentially, what makes sense typically is to set up some form of governance and some form of essentially encouragement that is very directly financial and very directly going to give them more revenue if they comply kind of further on that spectrum toward heavier integration. So you're kind of dealing with an adoption issue here. And if we can incentivize them through our governance to go ahead and do a more robust integration and invest in that, either upfront or very quickly, what is this going to do? Well, this is probably pretty obvious, but it will give us the inventory data. It's going to ensure that it's updated regularly. Everyone's going to be on the same page about kind of what the rules are within this essentially marketplace, this buying group and group purchasing organization kind of power of this overall group is pretty substantial. And so, in order for these different vendors to get access to the group, they have to meet certain criteria. If they want more exposure, if they want more access to higher quantities and more consistent orders from the members, they need to meet certain criteria. So, they're promoted and recommended and these kind of things. And so, this is a way to kind of put some of that expense into essentially a mutual shared area for these vendors so that you as a buying group aren't having to chase them down. You kind of want to think of it as like, we are going to provide you access to this marketplace and we're going to help you. And we have standards that we will kind of promote that you progress through, from literal individual updates through our interface to bulk updates and bulk uploads, through templates, and then eventually through EDI or API endpoints, or even integrating the systems to each other even more directly. And so these are, Ron, some of the scenarios that we've seen that work really, really well, basically giving the vendors a menu of options and then essentially establishing governance and benefits to progressing down that spectrum toward more and more automation.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it can even go one step further once you start getting into there to the notifications for and that's kind of where we are here on this next slide when we're talking about transferring inventory, the notifications of, now that we have either the EDI in place or maybe the notifications, we don't have the EDI in place, the notifications become even more important because I have to manually go in and either bulk through import and or just manually go into our UI and update the inventory counts, kind of like you said, for some of the smaller vendors that are getting into the game that don't have the EDI capabilities yet or the straight direct API integration capabilities. They can't run out of inventory. So inventory notifications. How do we let them know that in the scenario I gave a minute ago that Denver was running low? What is a low stock count? What is a typical purchase size of the buying group so that I can let them know that they've run out or that they're running out and they need to transfer inventory. This transfer inventory one's a really interesting one. I'd love you to go into the technicality of, I mean, obviously, part of it is the last bullet here where we talk about the different rate quotes, right? The scenario I gave, how much was it going to cost to ship 10,000 from Denver versus waiting and getting them from Seattle? Is it free from Seattle since I'm getting a full train load and I can fit all 70,000 on a train and I have to pay for a train anyway? If I'm getting a full train car that can fit up to 100,000, then anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 costs the same. Well, then it's a lot cheaper to get from Seattle. So providing accurate rate quotes, especially the delivery times, if I know that I could save whatever that cost is to ship them all from Seattle, can I deal with the extra 1 day or 3 days or 5 days that it's going to take instead of getting some of them from Denver, right? So really understanding and knowing what those estimated delivery times and accurate quotes would be is very important. What I'd really love for you to talk about is, you mentioned right when we started the webinar about a scenario. We didn't give an example of it yet, so I want to go in and give an example. You mentioned a scenario where people might want to have, even within a single warehouse, managing multiple inventory counts. The typical one, and this is kind of this upfront, we talked about just a second ago about the railroad ties, transferring inventory between locations, but between either warehouses or within a single warehouse. And we really talk about kitting and breaking kits and assemblies, right? And that's something that can be very instrumental in helping you sell, especially when it comes to promoting. When it comes springtime and you want to sell pool floaties, do you put them in a bundle and you've got, here's your whole get ready for spring pack at Costco, and for $300 you can buy this, and it's got 3 beach balls and it's got a set of towels and it's got all this stuff bundled together. But you want to make sure you have enough for this promotion, so you might break out some of that inventory from your standard towel inventory location and move that over based on the sales you think you might getting from the promotions of the get ready for spring. So I'd love for you to dive in a little bit about how you can manage those multiple locations and how you can build kits and break kits apart, especially when it comes to inventory runs and manufacturing, because we play a lot and we're dealing with a lot of that type within buying groups, especially, right?
That's right. Yeah. So this is a really detailed aspect. And again, like you said, Ron, we'll give an example here, but I also want to encourage folks to kind of see this as kind of like an opportunity to think about your scenario and how you might be able to kind of think about edge cases and how to handle those. But many of our clients that have physical locations where customers can visit, or maybe multiple countries where they are providing fulfillment, they are going to tend toward having this concept of transferring inventory. Now, this is a pretty standard concept, especially if you're, running an ERP and you are transferring between different locations. This is just kind of a standard thing that you're probably used to. But one of the challenges with this is whenever we're dealing with presenting to the user on the site where things are, what the status is of their order, and being able to kind of see, if like you said, Ron, they can break something out and get access to something that's in a kit as individual items. So typically, what we will do is whenever someone's placing an order, and let's just go through an example and say somebody's placing an order for, let's say, kitchen equipment. And the kitchen equipment is somewhat complex. It's a buying group order, and we have 10 different people that are companies that are purchasing. Um, 6 of those are actually different franchise groups within a overall franchise organization, and the other 4 are just kind of individual, let's say restaurant groups. And so these 10 different purchasers, 6 from a kind of single franchise, but they're all different franchisors. They're all making a big purchase, and 2 of them are opening new stores that have to be open in 2 weeks. And so they actually need these things, right away. Well, there's a scenario here where we want to be able to take advantage of the group purchase. Now, this may be a little bit extreme, but just for sake of example, um, we may have a distribution center in the US, and then we have a manufacturing facility that's producing most of these items in, let's say, Taiwan. And then we may also have another manufacturing facility that's producing these items in Great Britain and the UK. And so those different scenarios, we have 100 different items that are being purchased. Well, 10 of those are actually available right now in the US distribution center, but they're part of a kit. They're part of a kit that is a overall kitchen set. And these restaurateurs, they need these items within 2 weeks or they can't open their facility. So basically, what we need to be able to do is transfer the inventory, break the kits out in that distribution center, and have that capability of even seeing into those kits that the items that these restaurants need are part of a kit and can be broken out. And then the other thing would be transferring the inventory possibly from that broken out kit back to Taiwan so that it can be built out into a full set again, or possibly producing more items from the originating location in Taiwan and transferring it to that distribution center to remake the kit. And then being able to represent this properly in ERP from an accounting perspective. And now these distribution centers, they may have an integration system that's different from the ERP that runs your business overall. And then the manufacturers may also have a different ERP system. And so we need to be able to properly transfer the information about where the inventory is located, who has ownership of it on their books, and then essentially how are we reconciling that responsibility. Now, this can occur with multi-location facilities as well that are just retail locations. So some of our clients have retail locations, and we are needing to transfer items between those physical locations and represent that within their ERP system. We can certainly do that too. The other thing that you were mentioning, Ron, that was pretty interesting was this idea of being able to transfer the inventory and represent that when it's on different basically like different transportation methods. And this is really interesting because a lot of companies, especially that have retail locations, they will do inventory runs. So they have a truck or a train or some form of intermodal transportation that's happening no matter what. And that just happens weekly or monthly. And so, if we can hitch a ride, if you will, onto that transportation method and not have to pay extra, well, that's really useful information to a buyer as part of a buying group. And so if we're already transferring inventory anyway, and we can reduce the cost of fulfillment for a particular large item or large set of items, that's a really interesting thing to be able to take advantage of. And so these are a lot of complex details, but what we want you to take away from it is that ultimately getting accurate rates, getting accurate quotes on timeline and inventory, and being able to break kits apart, being able to transfer information, inventory specifically between locations. These are all capabilities that will lead you to be able to further take advantage of your inventory and provide a lot more value in your space. How can you use this? How can you use some of these ideas and these concepts within your buying group? And probably one of the most important things, Ron, is how do we present this? How are we going to show this to the users so they can understand it? It's great that you have all these capabilities, but how are we going to simplify this down? And I think that's another key aspect here for the users as well.
Oh yeah, the UI UX aspect is one of sometimes the most difficult parts, right? It's one thing to be able to understand and manage the complexity of integrating all these different platforms and then the data, but the behind the scenes optimization is really kind of where the magic happens. So all the magic happens behind the scenes, but up front, if we don't make it, what is it? Keep it simple, stupid, right? They always have that acronym. Everybody says KISS, keep it simple, stupid. If you don't keep it simple and make it easier for them to buy from you, it's very easy to lose customers just from a buying experience. Now, hopefully, with the buying group capabilities and the discounts you might extend to them, it might be a little tougher to lose a client. But then again, Sam's Club came along and all of a sudden Costco, how much business did Costco lose to Sam's and vice versa, right? Why did Sam's even become a thing? If Costco was already there and everybody had this membership and there was already a specific price and there was already a deal, how did Sam's Club even come to be? Right. And they seem to be doing pretty well. I mean, we just had a new Sam's open 2 miles from my house here, and I hadn't seen a Sam's forever. And now there's one much, much closer to my house than Costco. We were even talking to some friends the other day about going, and I'm just like, I'd never even thought about it before. I've been a Costco member for decades. So, same kind of thing. You want to make sure that competition doesn't creep in. So, the technical capabilities, I love every time Chris talks, I always am impressed because I keep forgetting, I'm always so worried about the UI UX. I always forget about the 3 to 5 year plan. And he always thinks about the 3 to 5 year plan, which is brilliant, right? Think about the 3 to 5 year plan. What do I need to do? Dream big, figure out where I'd like to be. I may not be able to start or even be able to afford to start today. I might have to do an MVP. I might have to give my vendors the ability to manually bulk import their inventory. But over time, I would love to be able to get feedback and automate the entire system. So you want to make sure when you're making these decisions up front to get with a vendor like Clarity and sit down and talk about the 3 to 5 year plan. Where could we go? Where could we be? What happens if we fall into success, right? You try to plan for it, but what happens if you go out, you launch, and all of a sudden success happens? Did you pick a platform that can get you to your 3 to 5 year plan in 6 months if something happens and you become wildly successful? Or do you drop the ball and lose all that momentum and all that potential? So you want to make sure up front, and that's one of the reasons why Clarity offers an upfront free consultation, right? Technical consultation. You can go to our website, clarity-ventures.com. request a meeting, jump on a phone with me. We'll throw some time on the calendar. We'll talk about your project. If we need to get in more detail, I'll bring a business analyst in and we'll spend a few hours and go through your requirements, talk about the project, talk about the 3 to 5 year plan, and figure out if we have a solution for you. And if not, we'll help you define what your solution is that you need. And then maybe we can help point you in a direction. We've done this for over 16 years, have a lot of experience in this area, would love to help you out, would love to sit down and chat with you about your project. Chris, do you have anything else you want to add in before we tie off today?
No, I think that was great. Thanks again, everyone, for listening and watching, and we will look forward to seeing you in the next video. If you would, hit the like and subscribe. And until next time, bye for now.
Bye for now.